Today is actually my 365th day as this university's president, and it is also, by coincidence, my first opportunity to introduce a rather more important president to speak. So while I hope I'll have many more such opportunities, I'm going to relish this one a little bit. Our guest this morning, Alexander Stubb, is the 13th president of the Republic of Finland. He's an extraordinary public servant and a genuine subject matter expert on the multilateral system, which he will discuss with you this morning. In his current office, which he's held since March 1st, 2024, he conducts Finland's foreign policy in coordination with the Prime Minister and his cabinet. But President Stubb's diplomatic and international expertise rests on far more than that. During a wide and varied political career, he has served as a member of the European and Finnish parliaments, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for European Affairs and Trade, Minister of Finance, leader of the National Coalition Party, and from 2014 to 2015, Prime Minister of Finland. Between his stints in public service, President Stubb worked as Vice President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and as a professor and director of the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute in Florence. Of course, his greatest achievement, having earned his doctorate in international relations from LSE under the supervision of Lord William Wallace. Since then, and armed with that, he's written widely on international affairs, including on European integration, the subject of his doctoral thesis, and he was undoubtedly headed for a sterling academic career before making the unfortunate choice to enter into public life. Unfortunate for us, fortunate for the public. On top of which, demonstrating a breadth of talent that depresses one-dimensional people like me, he also competed with the Finnish national golf team. Okay, the president will speak for about 15 minutes, after which there will be a chance for you to put your questions to him. When the time comes, please raise your hand. Someone will bring you a microphone. When called upon, just give us your name and affiliation and pose one, hopefully short question. And with that, it's my very great pleasure to invite the President of the Republic of Finland, Dr. Alexander Stubb, to the lectern.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for those kind words. Always with these sort of CV introductions, I find them a little bit embarrassing. And I'm reminded of Henry Kissinger when once he was introduced in a similar manner. He said that, well, you didn't really need to say that, but it is nice to listen to you. How far from it. It's really nice to be back at the LSE, and I have to admit that I was never invited into this lovely space and room at my time here. I spent only 2 years here from 1997 to 1999, and my PhD was about differentiated integration, or actually flexible integration. It was for the IR department and very much focused on the EU. And the basic thesis was that in the European Union, not everyone needs to do everything at the same time. And I had this categorical, of course, three-point analysis of what flexibility could look like. And when I look at the world today, and especially at Europe, I look at the place of the United Kingdom in the European Union. I look at the variable memberships that we seem to be having inside the EU. I have to admit that we are pretty close to a flexible world. Now, what I'll do today is I'm going to pan out a little bit because I just, well, I don't know if it'll pan out or not, but I just finished the manuscript of a book which I'd been working on for 4 years. I started working on it at Florence. And the book is called The Triangle of Power, Rebalancing the New World Order. It's basically about trying to understand what's going on in the world, and I'll follow in what I'm going to say pretty much the outline of the book itself, which hopefully will be published sometime in the fall. And I'll do it by giving you an introduction, 3 points, and a conclusion. I did start writing the book pretty much on the day that President Trump finished his first term in office in 2021. And I finished writing the book pretty much when he began his second term in 2025, which means that I have done a few revisions towards the end. Before I start, though, I just, if I may, give all of the students here a piece of advice. I've always been a firm believer in combining theory and practice. I'm very much a follower of, E.H. Carr, not necessarily in his international relations, but in his professional career, which means that if you're in academia, you get a really good theoretical framework of what the world might look like, or even in some cases, what you want it to look like. But when you are in civil service or politics in international relations, you get a taste of what the world is actually like. And combining the two and oscillating between the two is never a bad thing. Not for an academic, not for a diplomat, and not for a politician. And I've been very fortunate in my life to be able to do that. So let's begin by the introduction. I think there are those moments in history when you really feel that an order is changing. And I think we are in the midst of one of those moments. So we're living, I would argue, or your generation, our generation, is living the 1918, 1945, or 1989 moment in history. Sort of when you know that the old world order has died, but you don't really know where it's going yet. And of course, in many ways, we can either get it wrong, more or less right, or we can be indifferent about it. So in 1918, and especially after Wilson's plan to set up a League of Nations, we realized that it failed. It wasn't strong enough. We ended up with World War II. After World War II, the leaders of the time more or less succeeded. They created the United Nations. We had a bipolar world with the Soviet Union and the US, but the power balance was there, the institutional structure was there. We didn't go into World War III. And of course, in 1989, when I began studying, we thought that history ended. There was this feeling that all 200 nation states in the world are going to revert to some form of a combination of democracy, or liberal democracy, I guess, social market economy and globalization. So there was this promise, this light of a better future. Remember, 200 nation states. And now, what happened then, of course, was that we got a bit, lethargic, I guess, in our intellectual or ideological vigor. We thought that, of course, everyone wants to be a democracy, everyone wants social market economy, and everyone wants globalization. But it didn't happen. And now, by way of comparison, when you guys are studying here, either doing a BA, a master's, or a PhD, you're facing a similar type of a situation, trying to understand international relations. The difference, of course, being that I think in 1989, we kind of saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Now we're seeing a bit of darkness at the end of the tunnel. But my message to you today is that, you can't detach yourself from the realities of world politics. You can't be deterministic and think that things are going to go one way. All of you have agency to do something about it. And I, of course, recommend everyone to do something about it. So let's then begin. Number one, order. Number two, balance. And number three, dynamics. So what's the world order like, or what did it used to be like? Well, I guess after World War II, it was quite clear. The world was bipolar. It was ideological, and the competition was systemic. So you had the Soviet Union representing communism, collectivization, authoritarian regimes limiting freedom in favor of the state. And on the other side, you had the United States in so many different variations representing liberal democracy, capitalism, and freedom. And these two poles were battling it out, with one place in where they tried to get along or find compromises, and that was the United Nations. There was a sense that there's a strong international institution where you have a set of rules with which nation states abide, more or less. But at the same time, we could say that Yalta, exactly 80 years ago, carved up the world in spheres of interest. Churchill, Stalin and Roosevelt met at Yalta and said, this is what Europe looks like, this is what the world looks like, and by the way, we're going to have a UN Security Council with 5 members and veto power for those members. So there was this balance. That was the order. Then, when the Cold War ended, in 1989, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then I guess subsequently with 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union, we entered a unipolar world. That was a unipolar moment where the United States was the undisputed superpower of the world, economically, politically, and from a security perspective in general. And there was this feeling that here we have this guiding light which is taking us towards liberal democracy, capitalism, and globalization. And of course we saw various independence movements around the world and the flourishing of new nation states pretty much on every continent. I myself, studying at the time, became a firm believer in Fukuyama's end of history thesis. I really liked it. It was appealing. There was a sense of sort of idealism, optimism in it. You combine that with, modern technology, and you thought, now we're going to see the world flourish. I mean, who would ever want to be in an authoritarian system? Why should they be constrained and shackled out of the world of freedom? Then, we can debate about when the change in the order began. We could take 9/11, when a lot of Western states, led by the United States, basically went more for interests and security, in other words, fighting terrorism, than values and democracy. There was a sentiment that you could actually democratize nation states through wars. We could take Georgia in 2008 or Lehman Brothers in 2008 as a turning point. The euro crisis, the failure of the financial structure of the West. We could look perhaps at a smaller scale at the asylum crisis in Europe 2015, or we could take Brexit 2016. But there was this sentiment that we were moving towards not a unipolar world, but a multipolar world. Of course, Europe had its problems, the US had its problems, a lot of democracies saw the emergence of different populist type of movements. At the same time, we saw state capitalism giving dividends in China and elsewhere, and showing that, well, perhaps there are alternative models that can work. But for me as a Finn, the culmination point of the end of the old order is the 24th of February 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine full scale. Because, of course, remember, it had attacked Georgia in 2008. It had annexed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014, and there was a more or less hot war in the eastern flank of Ukraine ever since 2014, with different types of temperatures going up and down. But that, for me, was the moment. And that's kind of the beginning, I guess, in many ways, of my book as well. I started with a text message exchange with the foreign minister of Russia. I was at Florence at the time, and I still had his number, so 3 days into the war I sent him a text message saying that, Sergei, please stop this madness, you're the only one who can stop him. And he answered, who do you mean, Zelensky or Biden? So what I'm trying to say is that there is an element of cynicism sometimes in international relations, and after a less rather than more fruitful exchange of 8 or 9 messages, I decided, okay, I'll leave it be. But for me, especially as a Finn, this was a big moment when I realized that now the basic tenets of the international order as we knew it, based on the tripod of independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity of a nation state, was violated. Then, of course, one thing has led to another, and we've seen a change in the world order by and large. So right now, I would argue that we are in the middle of a change of an order where you really have 2 more or less opposing tenets. One is multipolarity, which, as we can see, is leading to an a la carte, rather messy disorder, when power vacuums, when someone leaves a field of international relations, a power vacuum emerges and someone is out there to fill it, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Ukraine. And on the other side, you actually have this, in my mind at least, dream of a continuation of a multilateral world order where there are strong international institutions and rules which you abide by. My second point today is about the balance, and I've simplified it in this book into a triangle of power. And my argument is that you have the global West, the global East, and the global South. So the global West is more or less 50 states, at least up to a point led by the United States, which I now, of course, argue that is shifting because of the approach of the current administration, which is different from previous one. I'm not making a value judgment whether it's wrong or right. I'm just making a realistic statement that it's different. And difference you have to live with in foreign policy. This system, at least previously, wanted to preserve the current order. On the other side, you have roughly 25 countries led by China in the global East, followed, of course, by the likes of Russia, perhaps Iran, North Korea, and 21 other states that vote with them in the UN, more or less. They want to change the order. If you look at the rhetoric of Russia, for instance, it's all about changing the world order based on nationhood and sovereignty. Read Russian spheres of interest. And China saying that, yes, we want a multipolar world which is not led by, AKA, the United States. My thesis is that the one who's going to decide the new world order is the global South. And I know that it's unfair to lump 125 countries together, but you have key swing states that will have an impact of what the world order will look like. The likes of India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico. And this is regardless of the triangle of power between the global West, global East, and the global South, and regardless of, what the United States is going to do. And my argument is that if the global West wants to win this game, in other words, preserving at least the remnants of the current world order, then it needs to reach out to the global South. And I have defined a concept which I call values-based realism and dignified foreign policy of a way in which you do it. So you have to understand that you stay true to your values. So in our case, or at least in my case, democracy, freedom, protection of minorities, rule of law, equality, justice. But you realize that in order for you to solve the world's big problems, climate change, technology, pandemics, development, immigration, you can't do it with people who are, well, only Finnish or Swedish, if you know what I mean, or Nordic. So you come to this realization. What is interesting for me now as a political scientist and student of IR is that I thought that we would use values-based realism towards the global South and the global East. But there seems to be a tendency now that you have to use values-based realism also inside the global West. So that's kind of changed, I think, the game. That's why I still see it as a fairly useful tool. Then my third and final point before I conclude is to say that, yes, we have an order. Yes, we have this balance, which is a triangle of power. Now, what are the dynamics? And here, very shortly, I'll cut corners. There are three dynamics: competition, conflict, and cooperation. And my argument is that competition is good as long as there are rules around it. So it's okay to have geopolitical competition. It's good to have economic competition or technological competition because that actually advances humanity and mankind. But the problem is if you don't contain that competition, have a rules for it, if it's only transactional and deal-based, you end up in conflict. And what we saw after the Cold War was local conflict, right? It was very much sort of civil wars, if you will. There was very rarely a regional conflict, as we're seeing now, with, for instance, in the Middle East, or with Russia's aggression in Ukraine, let alone the third one, which is a global conflict, which things can spill over into. So my argument is that we need cooperation, and the simple reason is self-interest. If you want to solve climate change, if you want to solve AI, if you want to solve immigration, if you want to solve development, if you want to solve the energy crisis, you cannot go it alone. So you need to cooperate. And right now, when the world is in a flux, I hope that we can sort of come back to the mode of cooperation. Again, I stress agency. You can't detach yourself from the realities that we are in right now. You can only try to impact it. And therefore, I conclude that I think the rejigging of the New World Order would take somewhere between 5 to 10 years. And obviously, you have different scenarios. I go through those in my conclusions. I won't reveal them here. But different possibilities of the direction in which the world will go. But I hope that, we don't get it wrong, as they did after World War I. I hope that we don't get lazy, as we did after the Cold War when I was studying. So this is a call for you guys to get serious about what you're doing. And I hope that we get it more or less right, as the leaders did after World War II. I think the New World Order that we create in the next decade or so will actually define the world for the end, towards the end of the century. So it'll be very much that type of a moment that we are dealing with. And of course, finally, if you want my 2 cents of the triangle of power, it can be a triangle of power between the global West, global East, and global South. That's kind of the Helsinki solution of the OSCE in 1975. Or it can be a Yalta solution, which is a triangle of power between China, Russia, and the United States. With these words, happy to have a conversation. Thanks.
That was the President of Finland talking earlier this morning in London, England, at the London School of